Ishiro Honda once said that the tragedy of monsters is the fact that they are born too tall, too strong, and too heavy. And at least in the context of the films, he was right. These attributes have led to Godzilla having many disagreements with the Japanese military. But at least in the context of pop culture, these attributes have led to the opposite for Godzilla. They've allowed him to prosper and produce 28 movies. But I want to analyze this and discover what it truly is about Godzilla that attracts people to him and why he's been so endearing. And the only way to truly do that successfully is to review every Godzilla movie ever made. Some people might be angry, but regardless, welcome to Zazubaar's Godzilla Palooza. Greetings, Megalosauruses. I am Zazubaar, and welcome back to Godzilla Palooza. It's day 28, and today we're going to be taking a look at yet again another remake of a classic Godzilla film. Kinda sorta like the Millennium series is going back to what the Heisei films were doing. However, seemingly not. I mean, just kind of two movies were really remakes. GMK I didn't really consider a remake. It was more of a reimagining. This film is definitely a remake. And what I mean by that is today we're going to be taking a look at 2002's Godzilla against Mechagodzilla. This movie is kind of a direct, unadulterated remake of the 1993 film Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2. I mean, we've got Mechagodzilla being built by the government, we've got Godzilla destroying stuff, we've got an anti-Godzilla bureau now, although it's not specifically directed at him. So I mean, overall, it's basically it's basically a remake of that film. However, like all good remakes, while it basically retains the basic plot structure of Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2, it has plenty of different and fresh plot elements to make it stand out from that film, and make it maybe not better, but different enough where it's not simply rehash for the most part. You see, my biggest problem with Godzilla against Mechagodzilla is that, while not generic, it is a little bit kind of like we've been here before. The plot is very, very simple. The film feels very short, although it's not really all that short in the context of Godzilla films. I mean, usually Godzilla films are about an hour and a half long, and this film is basically that length. But it feels shorter than that. It's a very quickly paced film. And each act feels only about 20 minutes long, which it's not. It's way longer than that. But the film is overall it feels very, very short. And I think that's basically because of the basic plot structure. I always really liked this movie. The only thing that bugged me about it was the fact that it was so similar to Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2. But aside from that, and also, I was getting a little sick of seeing Mechagodzilla as a good guy. I wanted him to go back to being a villain, and, you know, of course I never got my wish, but I was kind of getting sick of seeing Mechagodzilla as a good guy. I wanted to see him go back to his villainous roots. But just, as you know, ignoring my personal childish hatred, I really like this version of Mechagodzilla. In this film, he's referred to as Kiyu. We'll get to that in a minute. But, you know, I do like this version of Mechagodzilla, and, again, the plot is different enough and slightly, a little bit fresh to definitely differentiate itself from Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2. But again, like all remakes, if you break it down to the basic plot structure, it is basically the same. I mean, Godzilla attacks, the government has to come up with some creative way to stop him. They build a giant robot that mirrors Godzilla, the giant robot malfunctions, they build it better, and then seemingly defeats Godzilla, though not really. The difference here is that there's not much else going on in the story. I mean, Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2 had the Rodan story, or Radon as he was called in that film, and the Baby Godzilla story. Godzilla against Mechagodzilla, by the way, I really do not like that title. The Japanese version is actually called Godzilla X Mechagodzilla. I like that even less. Really do not like the title of this film. Could they have called it something like Godzilla and Mechagodzilla fighting again? I don't know. Something aside from Godzilla against Mechagodzilla. It's just... And it just feels really good. They really wanted to try hard to not call the film Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla, so they just put in either an X or against. Both suck. Really don't like the title. But the thing is that, you know, Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2 had all those different plot elements. Against Mechagodzilla doesn't really have that. It's got one element, and it too is decidedly simple and, at this point in the Millennium series, somewhat cliche. We have, well, there's kind of two different subplots, but they both converge. We have a young operator whose name is Nakani, who pilots maser cannons for a anti-monster force that existed before the film even begins, called the Anti-Megalosaurus Force. That name is awesome. And also, by the way, I'm not sure if that's a reference to something, but if it's not, and this is the inception of it, the most recent Godzilla miniseries called Godzilla: The Half-Century War makes reference to that, and also starts the formation of that with the founding members of that force being in that comic, and also that's where that name starts. Funny coincidence, I suppose. She's a maser operator for that, and the maser cannons are the laser guns from the original Showa Godzilla series. You know, those big, huge laser cannons that were used to fight the monsters, which started in War of the Gargantuas. She is responsible for the death of a colleague's brother. Well, she's responsible for her colleague's death by accidentally missing with her maser cannon and knocking the Jeep he was in off a cliff, and Godzilla steps on it. So, it's kind of her fault. She feels overwhelming guilt for this, and she gets demoted from her position, gets a desk job rather than being out in the field after this, and she spends the rest of the majority of the film coping with this guilt and trying to look past it and continue to do her job. It's interesting. I like the difference here of, it's not that she lost someone she loved to Godzilla, it's that she's responsible for someone dying. I think it's a tad overplayed. Like, I feel like it's too much of the crux of the story. And it's a dramatic element, but it's not perfect, and somewhat simplistic, and kind of has an easy way of getting out of it. So I like it, but it's kind of, we've been here before. And it's interesting that it's not someone she loved, but it's someone that she respected, and someone who, well, it's not even that she respected him, it's just she caused someone else's death. So, that's, that requires some guilt. It's interesting, if not somewhat cliche at this point. The Millennium series, basically its entire run, has been doing characters who want revenge on Godzilla or have their lives ruined by Godzilla, and she's no different. It feels like we've been here before. She's a relatively well done character, and she's likable and very tragic, but nothing entirely unique, especially to the Millennium series. And this will bring me into my overall kind of point with Godzilla against Mechagodzilla and this being a part of so-called Godzilla Anthology, you know, the Millennium series, is that I didn't feel like this film had to be a complete reboot with the original. It very easily feels, to me at least, and again, you're free to disagree with me, I think this movie could have been an easy sequel to Godzilla 2000. And I think that making it a reboot, you waste a good chunk of time on re-establishing Godzilla as a threat and that there's a new Godzilla. And more than that, there's no impact of that. Like, it's not like GMK where his return is a big deal. It's just kind of there because they don't want it to be in continuity with GMK. So it feels very unimpactful for this to be a complete reboot and for this to be Godzilla's return, or Godzilla's rebirth, because it's firmly established in this continuity that this is indeed a second Godzilla because of what Kyu is. And I think that's quite clunky. And it makes it feel unnecessary that it had to be a reboot. I really do feel like it could have been a sequel to Godzilla 2000. If some finagling were put in, potentially GMK, only because the ending of that film left room for another movie to come in and do a sequel. And there has been a fan fiction that has connected the bridge of GMK and Godzilla against Mechagodzilla. But in the end, I didn't think this had to be a reboot in the way it is. Do this even. Kind of do it like Mechagodzilla did. Just have Godzilla regularly, or 2000 even. Have Godzilla regularly attacking and don't have this be his return. It feels very clunky and unnecessary. So, I honestly didn't feel like that had to be a plot element. And I think that ultimately, it feels very forced. And I don't like that. Especially in Godzilla Anthology. They really should have either had this be a sequel to Godzilla 2000, or just do its own continuity, but just have there be a long history of Godzilla attacks. The big interesting thing, though, the thing that kind of saves it, is that there's an interesting connection to past Toho films, in that there are references to Mothra, War of the Gargantuas, the original Gojira, and all this stuff, and it canonicizes all of it. Basically, here's what happens. The director of science and technology of Japan, basically one of the prime minister advisors, who was the same actor who played General Lasso in the Heisei Godzilla films, yay. Him and the prime minister begin to summarize that after the initial Godzilla attack, Japan was completely ravaged by giant monsters all the way up to 1966. And ever since then, that's been happening. And they actually had to form an organization that, with the designed function of killing giant monsters that attack Japan, called the Anti-Megalosaurus Force. I really, really like that because it's awesome, and it's a good it's cool to make that canon, all those old Toho movies. And by the way, I apologize in advance if I start slurring my words together. Kind of like my Godzilla 2000 review, that I'm recording this ungodly late at night, so I apologize. I do feel like that's a cool idea, and it couldn't be done if Godzilla had been attacking regularly, because the point is that Godzilla put a curse on Japan. That ever since his initial attack, Japan has been constantly ravaged by giant monsters, and not Godzilla. And that his return is said to be a big deal. Again, I wish we saw it and we felt the impact of it. I don't feel like we do, and that's a problem for me. And again, I see that we maybe couldn't have gotten a Godzilla attacking regularly if that was the premise, but still, it's an interesting Godzilla universe, but one that I feel like could still have a Godzilla who's been around for a while. Because here's the really, really clunky thing. Godzilla attacks initially in 1999, same year as Godzilla 2000. Why wasn't this a sequel? Anyway, so Godzilla reappears initially and attacks during a hurricane, a typhoon, excuse me. And this is when Nakani accidentally, causes the death of her colleague. And Godzilla reappears, and it's affirmed that Godzilla is Godzilla. That it's a new Godzilla monster. By the way, I like that before there's a news broadcast after this, they affirm that it's a new Godzilla monster, and that they don't call it Godzilla until the news broadcast confirms it. I really like that. So here's the problem, though. After that initial attack, there is no, indication that Godzilla has been reappearing regularly after that initial reappearance. Why? He seems to not attack only because Japan does not have a weapon suitable enough to defend the nation from it. He doesn't seem to reappear again until the events of the film are taking place in 2003, after Kyu is completed. That feels extremely convenient to me. Like he reappears 4 years previous just to establish his existence and to give the Japanese a reason to build Kyu, but then doesn't reappear until after they've done it. And it's very clunky. And you could argue that maybe he attacks in between that we don't see, but it needs to be said in the film because just the way the movie is, it's a very clunky plot point. Especially with the fact that once Kyu's built, Godzilla attacks once, and Kyu seemingly scares him off. Then Kyu runs wild, and by the way, I don't think I'm gonna go into a plot synopsis in this review because at this point it'd be pointless. I basically covered every major element of the plot just by going on. I apologize that this review isn't as structured as my previous ones have been, but I feel like I'll have still a natural progression that I've been having without the actual set organization. So let's just continue on as we were. And here's the thing. Once Kyu's completed, Godzilla fights him, then Kyu runs wild, and then you have to fix it, and then Godzilla doesn't reappear again, seemingly less than a week later, until after Kyu is fixed. What? It's very, very convenient, very clunky storytelling, extremely, extremely cheesy and convenient. So, I really resist that. It seems very convenient to me, and it makes this feel like less like a cohesive and consistent Godzilla universe, because it could all be solved if this was a universe where Godzilla was attacking regularly, like the Heisei continuity was with Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2. It made more sense in that film because they clearly had Mechagodzilla ready to go long before Godzilla attacked again. So it's extremely clunky, convenient, and not good storytelling. So that's a really clunky plot point, and one of my biggest critiques of the film is the clunky story. And that's a big part of it, and also the fact of the matter is that this shouldn't have been a reboot, it should have been a sequel. Aside from that, though, just to talk about the positives, I do really like Kyu itself. It's a good reworking of Mechagodzilla in that, kind of like how Mechagodzilla 2 was, it's another reworking, though it's a little bit too similar to Mechagodzilla 2 to be extremely unique, but Kyu does come off as his own different thing because of the main element, the fact that it's kind of a cyborg again. Mechagodzilla 2 was not a cyborg, it was kind of just a straightforward robot. The original Mechagodzilla was called a cyborg, though it really wasn't, because it was kind of just a robot. There was nothing about that original Mechagodzilla that cemented it as a cyborg until Terror of Mechagodzilla, but I'm getting way off track. But Kyu is unique because it uses the actual DNA of the original Godzilla to have to run its computers, and that it uses an advanced DNA computer that not only makes it equal to Godzilla, but also slightly stronger because it's robotically enhanced. So, interesting idea. Here's the after product of that interesting idea. Because of the DNA inside Kyu, because its brain is a computer run on the DNA of the original Godzilla, It only takes a little spark to get it to turn into Godzilla again, having a genetic memory, which happens when Godzilla roars, and Kyu goes crazy and turns into Godzilla. Very, very interesting idea. What's done with it? Absolutely nothing. There's an interesting point brought up that because Kyu has the DNA of Godzilla built into it, that it's wrong of the Japanese government to use it as a weapon because it's a living thing that just wants to find peace. There's two problems with that. One, that idea is never carried through. After that initial running wild scene, Kyu never shows any signs of self-activity outside of being controlled by the Kyu squad. There's nothing about it that says that it's independently thinking after that initial running wild scene. And even in Tokyo SOS, which is a direct sequel to this, we'll talk about this tomorrow, even that film doesn't really bring that idea much to the forefront until the ending, and even then it's a tad strange. Here's my other problem with it. Not only is it not carried through, but this statement by the way, this statement is uttered by the little girl, the daughter of one of the scientists who built Kyu, named Professor Yahara. His daughter Sarah comes up with this complaint about Kyu that it's a living thing, so that way they have no reason to, or no right to, make it fight. But her reasoning is off. She says that it just wants to be friends. Has she ever seen any footage of the original Godzilla attack? If we're led to believe that Kyu is just kind of a revamped version of the original Godzilla, just under control of the Kyu squad, it doesn't just want to be friends. I mean, clearly when Kyu runs wild, it's under its own self-interest. So, you know, okay, let's say that Kyu is let loose. Let's say the Japanese government listens to Sarah and lets Kyu loose and says, "You're right, we're wrong. Here, be let free." It wouldn't just want to be friends, it would go and destroy Japan, because that's what the original Godzilla was. He was a walking allegory for the A-bomb and one who wanted to take revenge on humanity. So that argument is complete BS. The only thing that has merit about it, and she doesn't says this, so it's still a problem, and the ultimate problem is that there's nothing about the film that doesn't side with her, or that we're supposed to not take her word 100% just because she's a child. There's nothing about that. We're almost led to believe that whatever she says is true. The problem with that is that it's an interesting idea to have Kyu. It's almost like a continuation of the original Gojira, that man fucks with nature, so nature creates a monster to take revenge. So it's kind of the same thing with Kyu. Kyu resurrects a monster that was the nature's revenge, uses it as a weapon to fight as a weapon of revenge. So it's only natural that that robot would go back on humanity and say, "You can't do this, it's not allowed." Again, interesting idea. Nothing's done with it besides that initial running wild scene. And that's a great scene, but it's not completely, it doesn't go all the way. So, again, interesting idea, not fully executed. Again, say all you will about Tokyo SOS, but this idea is done better and more interesting in Tokyo SOS. So, we'll talk about that tomorrow. So I do ultimately like Kyu. I think Kyu is a tad clunky in that the ideas about him aren't fully explained, explored, or carried through. So we're just kind of left with a brilliant premise with little execution, because at the end of the day, he's just kind of Mechagodzilla 2 with new weapons fighting the current day Godzilla. So I do ultimately wish that he was more explained, and at the end, you know, the last third act where he fights Godzilla in Tokyo, that he had more of his original ideas carried through rather than just being another Mechagodzilla 2. So he has plenty of interesting ideas, as none of them are executed fully. But they're there, and they're interestingly explored, they just have to be carried through. So I like the idea of Kyu being the reincarnation of the original Godzilla, and I do like that that he runs wild and turns on humanity because humanity isn't supposed to have this kind of power. But again, it's not carried through all the way, and this will be an interesting idea that'll be better explored in Tokyo SOS. So, I want to talk about Godzilla now. I don't actually have a lot to say about him, only because it's kind of a generic Godzilla characterization. He's just kind of a Heisei Godzilla minus the tragedy. He's just kind of a generic destructive Godzilla, and I don't like a generic destructive Godzilla, because we've never had that problem really before. Well, we had this problem in Mechagodzilla, so I'm lying. I just don't like the idea of a generic destructive Godzilla. Oh, and we also had this in Mothra: The Battle for Earth. A destructive Godzilla should have another element to him that gives him a reason to be destructive, and usually it's the idea of tragedy. That's never brought up with this Godzilla, and at the end of the day, this particular version of Godzilla doesn't have much of a characterization. He's just kind of a destructive badass, and that's all. Fair enough, he comes off as that strongly and well, but I like there to be more than that with a destructive Godzilla. So, I really wish that there had been something more. Maybe, and this is an idea that will kind of be brought up in Tokyo SOS, that he's attacking Tokyo to reclaim the bones of his ancestor as kind of family reverence. That's never brought up in this film. It's kind of brought up in Tokyo SOS, but again, even not that strongly. And again, it just makes this Godzilla a tad generic. And I don't like that, especially with a destructive Godzilla. And especially this late in the franchise. So, I needed something beyond the simply destructive badass. But as a destructive badass, it's awesome. Godzilla's redesign is a nice redesign. It's kind of a combination of the 90s Godzilla and the Godzilla 2000 design. In that he's upright like the 90s Godzilla, but he's got the crazy spikes and scales of the 2000 Godzilla. So, in a great redesign, he's got a great badass design, he looks like a true force of destruction. I just needed something else in his characterization. So, I was missing that. Otherwise, though, I do ultimately like Godzilla in this film, just, he needed something more for me. So, let's talk about well, I already kind of did talk about the themes and allegory. The effects in this, well, I guess I'll touch them a little more strongly. The theme of Godzilla against Mechagodzilla seems to be that man does not have the right to reap the cradle of life. And here's what I mean by that. Dr. Yahara's daughter Sarah, by the way, I want to touch on Dr. Yahara briefly, only because I just want to say that I really like him. He's an extremely likable and well-rounded character with some good humorous moments, and I really like him as a Godzilla character. His daughter Sarah is a young girl who takes life very seriously, and especially life and death very seriously, because her mother, Dr. Yahara's wife, died in childbirth when she was giving birth to, Sarah's younger sibling. They never stated gender. That makes for an interesting parallel to Kiyu, because here we go again, man's kind of taking life lightly by creating a DNA-comprised Godzilla with bionic parts to fight another Godzilla. Man is kind of taking life a little lightly. Interesting idea. It's not carried through well. In that the themes at the end of the day don't shine through. There's never a complete arc of this theme. There's never a complete conclusion or carryover of it. It's just kind of there, and I feel like something more interesting had to be done with it. And I don't think the film has to be preachy and come down on this idea in any way. I just needed something for the characters to do, something for the characters to say, to reaffirm that theme and make it seem like that was the point of the story. At the end of the day, the story does feel a little generic, because it's just kind of like we're creating a weapon to fight Godzilla, and at the end of the day, the weapon is successful. I wish the theme was hit a little more strongly than that. So really, there is a theme here, and it is an interesting one. I just wish that it was carried over more strongly and was more reaffirmed. So it's there, just not fully executed. So that'll bring us into the effects and music. The effects of Godzilla against Mechagodzilla are great. They're not as unique and expressive as the GMK effects, but I don't want to compare them because these are very different. They're just fantastic. They make the movie fun to watch, they make it extremely epic to watch, and just the effects are great. The face on Godzilla, fantastic. The thing I love about this Godzilla suit is the eyes. They're so goddamn expressive and full of life. Kind of an interesting differentiation with the GMK Godzilla, which didn't have eyes. Well, it had eyes, but without pupils and life. This Godzilla has very expressive and full of life and energy eyes, and I like that as a differentiation with the GMK suit. I really like the head. It's kind of an interesting slimmed down version of the 2000 head, and I do ultimately really like this design. And the effects on it are fantastic. I love the way Godzilla's tail moves. It seems more natural than it kind of ever has. In a Godzilla film, it moves very naturally, and that's not always the case. Sometimes it does look like it's on wires. And sometimes he just seems to drag it around like it's just kind of a loose baggage. And I like Godzilla moving around his tail, and it's done in this film quite well. So overall, the effects are great. The effects on Mechagodzilla are seamless. He looks like a robot, and he moves like a robot. And I also like how, unlike Mechagodzilla 2, there are never questionable moments where he seems to be moving of his own free volition, where it's kind of like he's doing movements that it wouldn't look like a human would be able to control, where as opposed to this Mechagodzilla, Kiyu, where he moves and stands still like a robot. And there's this great shot where Kiyu has his arms still and looks very robotic and stoic, and then he crunches in his fingers and it looks extremely robotic. So I really, really like the effects. They're fantastic, they're seamless, and overall they're very, very elaborate. There's a lot of elaborate shots in this film, like when Nakani is walking below the wreckage of Kiyu. And there's another great shot where we see the streets of Tokyo being evacuated, and in the background you can see Godzilla destroying jets. So I really like that as well. So overall the effects are fantastic. So let's get on to the music score. I unfortunately didn't look up who does the music score for this film. I try to do that with all the Godzilla reviews, but I forgot. The music score in this is great. It's very dramatic, very epic, and filled with life and power. Mechagodzilla's theme is awesome. Godzilla's theme is a carryover from Godzilla vs. Megaguirus, but it's one that I really like, so I don't mind. There's no Ifukube music in this at all. It's all new score, and I find that fine because I like this music score a lot. So I don't mind that there's no Ifukube music because it's ultimately good music. So I do really like this score. I think Mechagodzilla's theme is amazing, and overall I think the score is dramatic and hits the emotional cues that it needs to hit. So I really, really like this score. At the end of the day, though, Godzilla against Mechagodzilla needed a little more. It needed a little more development, a little bit more execution of its great ideas, and at the end of the day, it needed to be a little less basic. It feels like a very simple Godzilla movie, one that has a lot of interesting ideas, but they're not carried through enough where it truly sets itself apart from other films in the franchise. So, because it's successful at what it's trying to do, and it's an ultimately very entertaining and well-paced Godzilla movie, I'm gonna give it a 4 out of 5. I think that it's kind of maybe a weak 4 out of 5, but it's definitely a 4 out of 5. It's not bad at all. In fact, it's quite good, but it needed a little more. It needed a little more development. It needed a little bit more time to cook, and I think that it was perhaps a little rushed into production, mainly script-wise. Like, I think that the effects and the production values are great. I think that the script needed a little bit more time to cook, because there are some great ideas here that aren't executed well. So 4 out of 5 for me. I think it's a well done Godzilla film. Not one of the best, but it's definitely good. Just needed a little more time to cook. And thankfully, it got a little more time to cook. Well, kind of. Its overarching story got a little bit more time to cook, because it had a direct sequel, and one that mainly improves upon Godzilla against Mechagodzilla in 2003, when we have Godzilla Tokyo SOS. I'll see you guys tomorrow for that review. Sayonara.